So, welcome everyone. This is our fourth class, I believe, in Buddha Nature, the Tathagata Essence, the basic program. Let's go ahead and start as we usually do with some prayers. Let me pull those up on the screen. And we'll recite this praise to Shakyamuni Buddha once. But we just went through the Buddha jewel in the last class. So you might think about all the qualities that we talked about then, these 8 excellent qualities that the Buddhas embody. And then, of course, all the qualities that are in these different ways of speaking about the Buddha, his ability, his knowledge, compassion, and so on. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. And then the short mandala offering. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. And then finally, refuge in bodhicitta, first time in English and then 2 times in Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kapsu chi daki chanyen gipe sanam gi dola penchir sangye drupar sho sangye chodang soki choknam la Jangchu Bardu Dakni Kapsu Chi Daki Chanyan Gipe Sanam Yi Dola Penchir Sangye Druparsho. Let's do a short meditation before we begin tonight's class. So we'll spend the first few minutes just focusing on the breath, and then we'll set our motivation together. Okay. So again, just choose to work with the breath in whatever way is suitable to your mind. We'll do this in silence, and then I'll come in and help you set your motivation for this evening. So as I just mentioned in last week's class, we looked at the Buddha jewel. In the context of this text, this is the final result, the ultimate result that we are seeking. And as we saw last week, the qualities of a Buddha jewel are divided into two main categories: the fulfillment of our own welfare, which is when we have brought our wisdom mind to its greatest capacity. And that's together with both the natural purity and the purity of the adventitious defilement that the mind will have at that point. The emptiness of the mind plus all of the true cessations. We will have completely purified our own minds. This is our own welfare brought to its greatest potential. And we also saw the other qualities, the knowledge of conventionalities and the compassion and the ability and so on that allows for us to be able to benefit others. Others' welfare is the second part of what a Buddha jewel encompasses. And this is directly a mirror of our mind of bodhicitta, our motivation that we are cultivating right now. We strive to become a Buddha, to completely purify our own minds, develop our own qualities, but with the main aim of being able to benefit others. In this way, the mind of bodhicitta is set on both welfares, the welfare of ourselves and the welfare of others. But as Lama Zopa Rinpoche would always say, it's most important that we hold the second of those to be primary. Our main motivation is to be here to benefit all beings. We recognize that the only way to accomplish that, the only means that will allow us to do that, is by becoming a Buddha ourselves. So we don't think so much about our own welfare as much as developing ourselves completely so that we can accomplish the welfare of others. Driven by deep compassion, loving kindness for all beings, we want to be able to help them with the greatest ability, the greatest power. Therefore, we have to become a Buddha for their sake. So cultivate this mind of bodhicitta now that mirrors these two results in Buddhahood: our own welfare, seeking to become a Buddha, and the welfare of others in order to benefit all sentient beings. Okay, so again, welcome to tonight's class. What I'd like to do to get things started, just a very brief review of what we've done so far. Again, we introduced the 7 vajra points that are in this text, these 7 really profound subjects. And we're only going to be covering the first 4, recall. And we're going to hopefully complete the first 3 or come close to doing that tonight. And these are the resultant states of the Buddha jewel, the Dharma jewel, and the Sangha jewel. We'll go into more detail on the latter 2 jewels in particular tonight. Then we will go on to the 4th topic, Buddha nature, and that's the main topic for the rest of this course. We won't be going beyond that, but recall that there is the 5th, 6th, and 7th topics of enlightenment, all of the qualities, the excellent qualities that are possessed in those beings who have attained that, and then, of course, the activities of those beings. And recall that this is set up in terms of, first of all, the result, the 3 jewels that we want to become. The Buddha nature, which is the substantial cause for us to be able to accomplish that. And then the remaining 3 are the cooperative conditions, the things that are conducive to helping us to achieve that result, having enlightened beings in our lives that influence us, that guide us. So what I'd like to do to get things started tonight, I realized after last week's class, one thing was I skipped over a little bit of commentary that I actually meant to cover. And I think that would have clarified things a little bit and also given you a little more information. So I'm going to kind of go back to the beginning of the Dharma jewel presentation. And I think it will help anyway, because we'll just have to get our heads back into that topic. Then I realized I think I misstated one thing that I'm going to correct tonight, and I'll put it on the screen when we get to it. But let's go ahead and get the commentary back up. Recall that again, this is the second of the 3 jewels, the Dharma jewel, which is essentially as it says there on the screen, true paths and true cessations. So we did have that kind of first little line of this verse 9. I'm not going to go through that introductory paragraph. You can read that on your own. Again, the idea was that we want to talk about the Dharma jewel in terms of kind of the resultant state, but that doesn't mean, again, that the Dharma jewel doesn't precede the attainment of Buddhahood. Anyway, there's that first line that's in 1:9, line A. I bow down to the sun of excellent Dharma. And recall that the sun, this example of the sun, the analogy of the sun, is primarily in the context of true paths. And what qualities does it have? These are included in true paths and true cessations. The Dharma jewel has these two main topics, just like for the Buddha jewel, we had one's own welfare and the welfare of others. So let's look at these first three lines. I think last time I just kind of began describing these without really going through the commentary, and I think it'll be helpful to go through that commentary. First of all, it is inexplicable as not non-existent, not existent, not existent and non-existent, not other than existent and non-existent. This is just getting at these four extremes of how something could possibly exist. This is the first quality of the Dharma jewel, but it's only a part of the first quality, or one way of explaining it. That first quality is inconceivable. So first of all, it's inconceivable because it can't be found to exist in any of these four extremes. Secondly, in that next line, line C, it's devoid of description. This is the second reason why we can say that the true cessations are inconceivable, is because we can't, although we can try to use words and ways of describing what a true cessation is, in terms of its natural purity, it actually is impossible to do that. As we've seen, emptiness itself, we can talk about it, give language to it, but to really know the taste of emptiness is through a non-conceptual mind. And then the third way that we talk about inconceivable, that it's known by oneself alone as an Arya. When you attain that exalted wisdom, then you will have your knowledge of it alone that will be very different, again, from what anyone else can know who hasn't had that same experience. It's through the power of that we actually know emptiness in its full kind of range of experience. Then I think last week I said this pacification was referring to the other qualities, because I think I got a little mixed up on the numbers of these. That is actually referring to numbers 2 and 3 in terms of the first three qualities, and these are again related to true cessations. So let me just kind of give you a little PowerPoint presentation on that I think, well, it's not going to be much. It's just going to allow you to put numbers on this if you want to insert them, if you have a paper copy of the text. You also have these in the materials that I gave to Venerable Dundup to upload for this week, which he's done. So again, in these what we saw right there, this is actually the verse 10 that is referring to these 8 qualities. So I started touching on that, and I'm going to come to that in a moment. But you see that again, there's inconceivable, free from the two, and non-conceptual. These first 3 relate to true cessations. The next 3, pure, clear, and of an antidotal class, refer to true paths. And then that which is separation from attachment is true cessations, and that by which there is separation from attachment are the true paths. So when we look at the individual 8 qualities, this is how they're set out. So when you correlate them to the verse that we're looking at right now, verse 9, we see that for one, there are 3 parts to it. I even went through this with the quote from the Dalai Lama in last week's slides. You might recall this quote. It's right here. It says, the excellent quality of being inconceivable consists of 3 ways that true cessations are inconceivable. I'm not going to go through all that again, but these are the same 3 ways that we're talking about here in this first part of verse 9. First of all, it's inexplicable as those 4 extremes. Secondly, 1b, it's devoid of description. As I said, cannot be put into words exactly as it is. Thirdly, 1c, it's known by oneself alone as an Arya. And then second and third, it's pacification. Again, those are the qualities here, free from the 2, meaning free from karma and afflictions, contaminated karma and afflictions. And thirdly, non-conceptual. Okay. So we're going to get to a full description of everything in verse 10, but I just want to, or 9, I'm sorry. Yeah, 10. But I just wanted to point out how this is a mirror of what's in verse 10 already in verse 9. It's just that pacification includes 2 and 3. Then for the rest of the verse that we'll just talk about in a moment, with undefiled, that's the lacking defilement, radiant light rays of stainless exalted wisdom, it's just possessing that wisdom. The Dharma subdues attachment, anger, and obscuration with regard to all objects. This is that antidotal component to it as well. So this is, again, just how we're going to be looking at these as we go through this bit of commentary that, again, I missed last week, and I think will be useful for you to be able to make more sense out of that verse in particular. Okay, so this was introducing B and C. Again, these are the first 3 qualities of the Dharma jewel of true cessations in particular. So again, this is how it's divided in terms of the 3: not being the object of realization of a consciousness with dualistic appearances, not being the object of realization of others, not being an object of realization through eliminating dualistic appearances. I'm only going to read the first line of this because after this, Gyaltsab gets into a whole thing about a Sangha's commentary, and we're not studying a Sangha's commentary, we're studying Gyaltsab's commentary. So the very first sentence there, since, first of all, it is inexplicable as inherently non-existent, existent, both existent and non-existent, and neither existent nor non-existent, it is free from the 4 extremes of elaborations. So this is once more pointing to the natural purity that is a part of true cessations. We really don't have a true cessation of natural stains. Remember last week I went through natural stains and adventitious stains, kind of comparing it. We don't really even have natural stains. This is what we mean by natural purity. But yet the mind is adhering to the things to exist inherently. It's kind of has an overlay of a fictitious stain, adventitious stain. So we have this natural purity that is always there. This first quality in particular is going to be talking about that natural purity, the emptiness of true cessations, the emptiness of all phenomena. Then we have the adventitious purity. Numbers 2 and 3 are going to be working with that, how we have actually, through the force of our meditative equipoise on emptiness, removed the defilements, the karma and afflictions for the time being, and of course remove the layer of the obstructions, and how we are then, in a state where we can, my textbook in front of me, so I have it when it's not on screen here. Then we are also in a state of pacifying, let me go to the page here, pacifying the conceptual mind that is this improper attention that is grasping at things as inherently existent. So again, we'll talk about pacification after we go through this first one, which once more is inconceivable. Inconceivable has, as His Holiness says, 3 ways of talking about it. First of all, free of those 4 extremes of elaborations. That's at the top of that page. Okay, we're going to go forward to the next page where it goes into the second way that things are inconceivable. Not being the object of realization of others, because the mode of realization cannot be completed through expressive sound, language, and defining things. It cannot be realized in dependence on other means. It has to be realized by the mind of the Aryan. Emptiness will only be known in its full dimension when we have that direct realization of emptiness initially on the path of seeing. So again, this is just speaking to that emptiness, the natural purity, which is the natural emptiness of all phenomena, especially true cessations in this case, is only realized in its full dimension in that way. And the third way that we can talk about it being inconceivable is that it's known by the meditative equipoises of Arya beings through the elimination of dualistic appearances. Last week I talked about how we can say there are different types of dualistic appearance we speak about in Buddhism. This one is in reference to the elimination of the appearance of inherent existence and the conception that is grasping at that. So when we have that gone from the mind in meditative equipoise, that's when emptiness is realized once more for exactly what it is. The true taste of emptiness occurs at that moment. Recall that there's this idea of like water poured into water. We also lack the dualistic appearance of subject and object appearing distinct. That's part of that experience. But we're mainly talking about all of the kind of appearances of inherent existence have completely fallen away at that point. So these explain, let me move it up a little bit, these 3 things explain by way of entity and object possessor the factor of natural purity that is a true cessation. Once more, you don't you don't ever have a cessation of natural stains because natural stains don't exist. But we believe in those natural stains. We believe that things inherently exist. That's the adventitious stain. The natural stains are not existent. So we have natural purity of all phenomena. All phenomena are already in the taste of emptiness. There's nothing there tainting them, staining them in any way. It's our minds that create this stain. And that's the next factor, numbers 2 and 3, the explanation of the purity of the adventitious. This is the other aspect of true cessations, not just natural purity, but the adventitious purity. So here Gyaltsab says, the cessation that is the purity of the adventitious, which is what we usually talk about true cessations being, is a pacification. That's why pacification was in that verse. Through applying the antidote that destroys the root of suffering, karma and affliction such as attachment, and that's number 2, and the basis of suffering that is the innate and intellectually acquired improper mental attention, grasping at true existence and its seeds. In other words, it's the removal of the afflictive obstructions in this case. Of course, we go on to remove the knowledge obstructions. That's also a part of true cessations. But here it's primarily talking about it in terms of the purity of those. So again, that's numbers 2 and 3 of these 8 excellent qualities of the Dharma jewel. Now recall that for the Dharma jewel, you don't need to possess all 8 to be a Dharma jewel. Any of these 8 will suffice. So at the moment when someone has cultivated a true path, but they haven't yet had the true cessation in the next moment, they are a Dharma jewel. The true cessation will follow. I mentioned that last week, how we have 2 parts to the meditative equipoise. Okay, so now we go into true paths. True paths, and if you have your little chart on the 3 jewels, the Dharma jewel in particular, then I will pull that up in a moment to reconnect with that. But we have numbers 4, 5, and 6, A, B, and C here. Purity, clarity, and antidote. Here's the verse, the 2 lines of verse 9 that refer to that. With undefiled, radiant light rays of stainless, exalted wisdom, the Dharma subdues attachment, anger, and obscuration with regard to all objects. Again, this is on page 47 of your text. I'm sorry, I didn't give you the page numbers earlier. My fault. Okay. Oh, no, I'm not 47, 46. 46 at the bottom. All right, so let's go through this explanation of these 3 qualities. The 4th quality, purity. The wisdom directly realizing selflessness does not have the defilement of the seeds of obscurations relevant to it. So when you are cultivating a particular true path, you are removing or kind of acting as an antidote to a particular level of the obscurations. First, the afflictive obscurations, and then the knowledge obscurations that the bodhisattvas remove to become a Buddha. Then we have the aspect of clarity. This is the 5th of the 8 qualities of the Dharma jewel. And once more, this is in relation to true paths. True paths possess the illumination of the light of exalted wisdom, directly realizing suchness. And it says here, the exalted wisdom of subsequent attainment, qualified by non-conceptual exalted wisdom of meditative equipoise, should also be known as a true path. It's technically not a true path, but it's when you're off the cushion after that meditative equipoise, you do have an understanding of how things exist that is very different from what you had before. I talked about that a little bit last week, and then I think we did read some of this last week. I'm getting into the material that I did cover. But just know that this is kind of the clarity that we have with regard to conventional phenomena. Because conventional phenomena aren't really understood in terms of how they exist until you've had the direct realization of emptiness. We can talk about them being merely imputed in all these things that we refer to in terms of our understanding of emptiness in the middle way. But we won't really know the subtle way that things actually exist until you come out of that meditative equipoise. So it's saying that they can also be known as a true path. We can include them in that because although they aren't a direct realization of emptiness at that moment, because that has ceased, you are influenced in terms of your understanding of conventional phenomena in what's called subsequent attainment, the period that follows the meditative equipoise. Then the 3rd quality, which is the 6th of the 8, antidote. Homage is paid to the excellent Dharma that destroys the attachment, exaggerating the attractiveness of all objects of observation, such as forms and so forth. And by entity, is that which sees things as pleasant, the anger which sees things as unpleasant and has the aspect of being opposed to them, and destroys the defective vision of confusion. So these three main poisons of attachment, anger, and confusion or ignorance. This is the antidotal quality of the Dharma jewel, the true paths. True paths act as an antidote to all of those misconceptions because they're all part of the wisdom or the mistaken view of things inherently existing, and the wisdom realizing emptiness counteracts them. So then it says, this is kind of at the end of those two sections, true cessations and true paths. Here, what is explicitly shown are Mahayana true paths and cessations. I can't emphasize that enough. You will see other presentations of these jewels where they talk about them in different contexts. This is a Mahayana presentation. That's why when we went through the 7 vajra points originally, we talked about them in the context of bodhisattvas. But these are the true paths and true cessations in the continuum of Arya bodhisattvas. Then it says there, but it can also indicate the Dharma jewel of the same name, which is an object strived towards by, again, those two practitioners of the fundamental vehicle, the Hinayana, solitary realizers and hearers, even though that is not what the expressed object here. That is not what is the expressed object here, okay? So that was verse 9. Again, I didn't go through some of that commentary, and I apologize. Last week, for some reason, I missed it when we went through. Let's go through verse 10, which is the actual verse that is in your, explained in that chart. Whoops, I'm sorry. This is the one we want to go through. Oh, no, not that. Got to go over further. That's why. All right. Dharma jewel. This is, again, the chart I put together on the Dharma jewel. I went through some of this last week. I just want to point out again that these are the 8 qualities that we're going to be talking about in verse 10, which is the second one in that first column on the left-hand side there. The qualities that we're going to be looking at then again are inconceivable, which once more pertains to the natural purity. I should have probably put that in this chart, but I didn't. I apologize. Numbers 2 and 3 are the adventitious purity that we just talked about. And then numbers 4, 5, and 6 related to true paths, pure, clear, and of an antidotal class. We just spoke about those, all right? So let's go back to the commentary and go through what Gyaltsab says in regard to verse 10. Verse 10 once more, inconceivable, free from the two, non-conceptual, pure, clear, and of an antidotal class, that which is and that by which there is separation from attachment. The Dharma is endowed with the characteristic of, again, the two truths, not the two truths as we often talk about them, ultimate and conventional, the two truths of cessation and path, the last 2 of the 4 noble truths. So, first of all, true cessations are inconceivable as any of the 4 extremes. Of course, they also have those other things that we spoke of that make them inconceivable. No, he doesn't touch on that again here. They are, secondly, free from the 2, karma and affliction, of course, meaning contaminated karma. We do produce uncontaminated karma when we have a true path that induces a true cessation, but nonetheless, here we're talking about contaminated karma and affliction of the class of the level that are being destroyed at that time, that we're ceasing. Then the second part of the adventitious defilement, which is the third quality, without the basis, concepts of true existence. At that point, you are also removing a layer of your inappropriate attention, that is, thinking of things as inherently existent. So those are the first 3, again, related to true cessations. And the other 3 related to true paths, pure, clear, and of an antidotal class. He doesn't talk about them again here. He talks about them again a little bit later. Thereby, true cessations are the entity of freedom from attachment, separation from attachment, and true paths are the cause of being free from attachment. Now again, true cessations as a permanent phenomena aren't really cause, but when you have the true path, it induces a cessation of a level of the obscurations. That's what we mean by the true cessations that are of an adventitious defilement. And then, of course, we have the natural purity that is always there, but nonetheless, that natural purity of true cessations is being delineated here in particular. So that's numbers 7 and 8, that last sentence that I just read. So those are the 8 qualities. So within the 4 noble truths, Gyaltsab says, from among the 2 the thoroughly afflicted truths, and the totally pure truths. The totally pure truths are the Dharma jewel with the characteristics of the two truths. So again, we can divide the Four Noble Truths into those two sets of two. We have the two that are the thoroughly afflicted, which are true sufferings and true origins of suffering. That's the state that we are in now. That is what is inducing the state of samsara for being. And of course, even beyond samsara, to still have some remnant of the obscurations that keep us being unenlightened in this Mahayana perspective. And we have the last two truths, true cessations and true paths. These are in the completely pure class. These are what induce nirvana, and especially the non-abiding nirvana of buddhahood, where we're no longer abiding in samsara, but moreover, we're not in the solitary peace of the Hinayana practitioners, the solitary realizers. And here is arhats, the arhats who attain that level of freedom. Okay, now I'm going to skip forward, and we go to verse 11, which is, again, this is kind of, we got like three verses, I think, 11, 12, no, 2 verses that kind of go into a little more explanation of these 8 qualities in regard to some of them in particular. Verse 11, separation from attachment itself is included in the truth of the path and the truth of cessation. Again, it's just whether we're talking about the actual separation or the cause of that separation. These two, in that order, should be understood through their 3 qualities, respectively. So again, this is just reiterating that we talked about those 6 qualities, 3 of them related to true cessation, 3 of them related to true paths. We should understand them through those qualities. So then Gyaltsab Je says, separation from attachment itself is in the nature of deed and doer, and consists of true cessations and true paths. The deed is to have a cessation. The doer of that, the cause of that, is the true path. In accordance with the order of the 2 sets of 3 thus explained, again, 1 through 3 and 4 through 6, these should also be known by way of sets of 3 qualities each. And no big mystery behind that. I am going to go through this little bit of commentary here. There's not a lot on this, but I think it's worth just touching on these again. Kind of get repetition in this text in terms of how it's explained. So in due order, among these 6 qualities, 1 through 6 of the 8 for Dharma Jewel, the first 3 qualities of being inconceivable as the 4 extremes, free from the 2, karma and affliction, and having no conception of true existence, explain the reality of cessation. Again, the first one, the natural purity, the other 2, the adventitious purity. Therefore, it should be understood that freedom from attachment consists of these 3 qualities whose entities are deeds. That sentence, in my estimation, should go with that first paragraph, because now we're going to talk about true paths and the 3 qualities that pertain to them. The remaining 3 qualities of purity of defilements, clarity of suchness, and of course that clarity of suchness allows one to know conventional phenomena as they are, an antidotal class of discordant factors. Those are again 4, 5, and 6, explain the reality of the true path. Therefore, it should be understood that the cause of being free from attachment consists of those 3 qualities. From that which is onwards explains the freedom from attachment is the Dharma Jewel. I don't need nothing, and that may be referring to a Sangha's commentary. Now we go on to the last verse for this Dharma Jewel. And this is verse 12. It says, inconceivable, 1, because of being unanalyzable, 2, being inexpressible, and 3, being known by the Aryas. Remember, those are the 3 reasons why it's inconceivable. I went through that earlier. Peaceful, this is again the pacification element, but it's peaceful in numbers 2 and 3. First of all, being peaceful because it's without the 2, which he put second here, without karma and defilements, and also being non-conceptual, no longer having the conception of inherent existence present in the mind. So those are the first 3 qualities that pertain to the true cessation. Then it says, for the last line, this is pertaining to true paths. By being the 3, pure and so forth, that we went through for those, it is like the sun. Remember, there was the sun analogy, and I talked about this briefly last week. So let's look at what is said here. It says, first of all, it is unanalyzable as the 4 extremes. And of course, it also is inexpressible based on a complete realization through names and concepts, and it is inconceivable because it's also realized only by an Arya's personal meditative equipoise. All three of those point to the singular quality of inconceivable, as I pointed out earlier, and as was in His Holiness's commentary that I shared last week. So we have three ways that we can look at the natural purity, the emptiness of these true existence, true cessations, in terms of their inconceivable, inconceivable quality. We can't find them through analysis as being any of the four extremes. We can't express what they actually are through names and concepts. And we also will not know it in its full nature until we have that Arya's meditative equipoise. In terms of adventitious purity, it is free from the two because karma and affliction are pacified. It is also without the conception of true existence. And then the last three, pure, clear, and the antidote and so forth, these are like the sun. Remember, I shared this last week. I'll go through it one more time briefly. They are pure, just as the sun is bright, clear, and stainless. There's nothing kind of obscuring the sun. It's just its rays are coming forward through that, absolute purity. And then they're clear, just as the sun illuminates all phenomena, the clarity that is induced through the light of the sun. And then the true paths also have an antidotal quality, just as sunlight dispels all darkness. So you have the wisdom of realizing emptiness. It is the true path that dispels all ignorance and everything that is built on ignorance. So that is where I'm going to stop for Dharma Jewel. Hopefully I've explained it a little bit better this week. Last week I think I was hurrying a bit too much in part. Know that we're going to go forward now and talk about the Sangha Jewel. Let me get this just set up in terms of, it's going to be on page 54 is where it starts at the bottom, with just introducing it. And then we will go into the actual kind of outline and what have you. As soon as I go through first the chart on that, I realized when I went through this today that for some reason, I don't know why, when I put the third quality there, I just repeated some knowledge of ultimate truth. And there's something more to it than that. I will provide Venerable Dundrup with this chart so he can load it up there for you. But know that this is that little bit of change on that chart that's highlighted in yellow here. So first of all, of course, we have this verse that we'll look at in a moment. That is the introductory verse to this, the paying homage to the Sangha Jewel. And then we have verse 14 that actually details out the 8 qualities. So the definition of a Sangha Jewel is an Arya person who possesses any of the 8 excellent qualities of knowledge and freedom. Remember when we talk about the Sangha Jewel in terms of the vajra points, we're talking about bodhisattvas who are Aryas, who have those true cessations and true paths in their continuum. And that's kind of what we mean by the ultimate Sangha Jewel. In terms of the individual qualities, they're divided it's kind of a different presentation. We've been mostly working with kind of more ultimate and emptiness kind of views of things as the first 3 qualities. Remember with the Buddha Jewel, it was the Dharmakaya and the emptiness of the mind. And then of course the true cessations when we got to the Dharma Jewel. Here we actually work with the knowledge component of it first, which is essentially the wisdom component that we have when we have achieved true paths. And then the freedom is the other 3 qualities. And then those are again subsumed within the last 2, numbers 7 and 8. So let me just go through this very briefly, and then we'll go to our commentary. 3 qualities are included in knowledge. First of all, realizing modes. Remember last week I spoke about modes and varieties. Modes are called such because the ultimate mode, the final mode of all phenomena, is their emptiness of inherent existence. And this is why we often say that everything is of one taste. Not that everything has the same emptiness, like it's one big vat of emptiness that exists in the world and everything is a part of that. Rather, everything that exists, every phenomenon that can be established, has its own respective emptiness. And they all have that mode of abiding in their final nature. So this is what we mean by modes. Varieties are the phenomena that have that emptiness, all the various things that exist in our world. So obviously, when you get to Buddhahood, you have a perfect knowledge of both modes and varieties. This is when you know the 2 truths in their whole way of existing without any conceptual mind or any faults or flaws in your understanding. But even on the Arya path, once you realize emptiness directly the first time, as I said, when you come out of it into subsequent attainment, you have an understanding of conventionalities. It's very different. There's also going to be another way we talk about understanding conventionalities in the context of our text, this Mahayana presentation, and I'll get to that in a moment. But the very first two qualities in terms of knowledge that are on that chart are the knowledge of ultimate truth, knowledge of the modes of things, and the knowledge of conventional truth, the varieties. And then we have something called inner knowledge, which there's different explanations of this, but the one that's kind of common to all of the texts is individual knowledge of both ultimate truth and conventional truth. And for some reason on the chart I had Venerable Dundra upload, it was just knowledge of ultimate truth. I don't know where I got that from. I think I was working on it and then I got distracted to something else and I never came back and finished it. So this is kind of, it's a weird way of talking about it, but it just means that you then have that individual knowledge of those together in your own mind. And of course, it manifests in a particular way with the Bodhisattva, and we'll talk about that when we get to our commentary. But nonetheless, this is kind of all in the category of knowledge. All Arya beings, all Sangha beings, especially, again, the Bodhisattvas on the path of learning as well as Buddhas, have an aspect of knowledge to, that's what makes them a reliable Sangha jewel, is that they possess that wisdom. Then we have three qualities included in freedom. And these are all just alluded to as pure in that verse. You go over to the verse on the left-hand side, verse 14 at the bottom. Numbers 4 through 6 are included in the simple phrase, is pure. But there are three different levels of purity, or three different types of purity. First, pure in being free from the obscurations of attachment, which is shorthand for the afflictive obstructions. Remember, I went through those last week. This includes the conception of inherent existence, as well as all the delusions built on that, and their seeds that are the force through which those afflictions and ignorance arise again in our minds. Number 5 is pure in being free from the obscurations of obscurations. I think that's the term that they give it, but it's the knowledge or cognitive obscurations. It's kind of a strange phrase, or obscurations of obstructions. This is the shorthand they use in this text. They call it obstructions whenever they're talking about the knowledge or cognitive obstructions. Once more, let me talk about what those are. I'll take it off screen for a moment. Knowledge obstructions are the imprints, in the Tibetan term is bakchaks. They're what is residing on the mind, these imprints from having had this ignorance since beginningless time. Every time this ignorance rises, grasping at inherent existence, it leaves behind a stain in the mind that gives rise to a dualistic appearance. And here, that dualistic appearance is the appearance of things existing inherently. So everything appears to us in our mind that is not in a meditative equipoise or not the mind of a Buddha, our unevolved mind. Everything appears to us as if it's real from its own side, as if it's established from its own side. This is due to these subtle imprints on the mind that give rise to this false appearance. And we buy into it, of course, and then recreate the conception, grasping at inherent existence. This is how we are in this sort of circular trap. We just keep grasping at inherent existence, creating more stains for things to appear inherently existent. The first thing we remove are the afflictive obscurations. That's believing in that false appearance. But then we have to remove the stains in the mind, these imprints that give rise to that false appearance. And then it will cease, and we will attain a state of Buddhahood. Those are, again, the obstructions to omniscience, again called here the obscurations of obstructions. I mean, it's a strange phrase. Okay, number 6. Now, again, remember that the Sangha jewel as well possesses any of these 8 qualities. Because some bodhisattvas, even though they might be Aryas, for example, they do have a true path, but they don't yet have a true cessation that is the end of cognitive obscurations, right? Because they haven't gotten to the pure grounds. As I mentioned last week on the 8th, 9th, and 10th grounds, that's when we begin the work as an Arya bodhisattva to remove those knowledge obscurations or obstructions, these obscurations of obstructions. Sorry, I'm kind of using those words interchangeably. The phrase once more that we're going to see in our text is these obscurations of obstruction. I'll probably end up referring to them as knowledge obstructions, though, because I prefer that term. Number three is an interesting one, or number six here, the third on these are included in freedom. Being free from inferior obscurations, which in parentheses it says the obscurations that hinder the generation of the mind of enlightenment due to being captivated by the bliss of an inferior peace. Of course, some beings who are bodhisattvas have removed that pretty early on. This is what is called the quality of irreversibility, where you're no longer going to revert or reverse to a lower motivation, the motivation of wanting your own peace, but rather you will continue on towards Buddhahood. And then, of course, the minimal level at which you will attain that irreversibility is at the eighth ground, when you've removed all the afflictive obstructions. Because the afflictive obstructions are, you will have tasted all of that freedom, but you are definitely driven to go on to remove the knowledge obstructions at that point. So again, we're not going to talk a whole lot about that one, but it needs to be mentioned because it's a component of purity that bodhisattvas on the pure grounds do possess, at least. Some bodhisattvas will possess it earlier, depending upon when they become an irreversible Sangha. Now, how are they subsumed? As it says there in the final line of this verse, the assembly of the irreversible, intelligent ones is endowed with unsurpassed excellent quality. So irreversible is referring to the component of freedom, the second one we talked about, and intelligent is referring to knowledge. So essentially those are subsuming possessing knowledge, numbers 1 through 3, which is what we mean by calling them intelligent ones, and then that they are irreversible in possessing liberation, possessing freedom, which again are numbers 4 through 6. So I know looking at these qualities of the three jewels in this way that we've been doing through these charts and through our text might seem a little bit obscure still. But if you do meditate on them and begin to gain an appreciation for what they are pointing to, by no means are they exhausting the qualities of these beings, especially the Buddha jewel. I mean, you can't even put a number on the qualities of a Buddha. I mean, it's beyond our imagination. The qualities of a Buddha are infinite. But nonetheless, we're kind of subsuming them within two main categories and then speaking about three elements of each of them that give us a deeper appreciation for what those are. So once more, this is hopefully somewhat enlightening to you to be able to begin to see that these are what we're trying to obtain. These are the three jewels that we are trying to culminate in our own mental development, our own evolution. So now this is introducing this teaching on the Sangha jewel. So it says this regards the passage mentioning the Mahayana Dharma Tathagata again. That's probably from a Sangha's commentary. After attaining the first ground for a bodhisattva happens concurrently with the path of seeing. That is when you enter into your initial direct realization of emptiness if you're initially on the Mahayana path. If you prior to that completed the Hinayana, then you'd already have realized emptiness on the Hinayana path. But as a Mahayanist, as a bodhisattva, which again is the main topic that we're referring to in this text, you will have this after attaining the first ground. It is impossible to reverse into samsara because of karma and afflictions, and the mind seeking liberation for oneself alone will not arise. So again, this is speaking to, in particular, those bodhisattvas who have that proclivity will attain that at the first ground. As I mentioned, all the bodhisattvas attain it by the eighth ground, but most of them probably will have it at that first level. But nonetheless, again, we'll see that as we go through the commentary. Therefore, Gyaltsab says, let alone actual application, even the intention cannot be reversed from complete enlightenment. For this reason, they are known as the irreversible assembly. Again, because we're talking mainly about these Mahayana Arya Bodhisattvas who have attained that irreversible quality. Okay, so here's verse 13. I didn't read this one yet. Let's look at that. It's not as clearly set out in terms of these qualities as the other verses were, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. But verse 13 says, as the mind is in the nature of clear light, meaning that, again, it has no stains of inherent existence, they perceive the entitylessness of afflictions. That's the adventitious purity that they see. And therefore, perfectly realize the pacification of the extreme of selflessness of all migrators. This is kind of that aspect of a conventional awareness that happens at this point. Bodhisattvas who go into that meditative equipoise, they come out into subsequent attainment and they see that this is the reality for all beings' minds, that they are free of any inherent stain, any natural stain, and that they have the afflictions themselves are not there inherently. Therefore, all beings can be enlightened. They see the Buddha nature of all beings, essentially, in subsequent attainment because of knowing the emptiness of all phenomena, through knowing the emptiness of on the path of seeing, and then also, of course, knowing the way that conventional phenomena exist as lacking inherent existence, and therefore we can develop our minds into Buddha. In the actual praise, I bow down to those who perceive complete Buddhahood in all, who are, meaning they see Buddha nature in all beings, who are endowed with unobscured intelligence, and who have the realization of exalted wisdom that holds as its object the purity of infinite living beings. So this verse in particular really speaks to this idea of correlating this with Buddha nature, that, when we come out of that meditative equipoise, having realized emptiness directly, we have an even deeper appreciation for the Buddha nature of all beings, and that the task of enlightening them all is completely possible because they all possess that. Okay, so here's the 8 qualities. I won't reread these. The first, knowing modes, is divided into entity and reason and is connected to the statement, I bow down to those who are endowed with these qualities. With respect to the reason for knowing modes, since the mind is in the nature of clear light, this is the first reason, it is therefore realized as an empty of inherent existence, because there's natural purity. By this way, this word clear light here is referring to that. We're going to see that on the next page. It's simply saying that the mind, by its nature, is unstained, doesn't have any stains of inherent existence. That's one reason why we can know modes. The other reason, because of this, the entitylessness of inherent existence of afflictions is realized. That's what will allow you to have adventitious purity, because you realize that the afflictions lack inherent existence as well. They're not inherent to the mind. Not only is the mind itself empty of inherent existence, but there are no, afflictions in the mind that can't be removed because they also are free of inherent existence. So the former may appear as a reason for the latter, Gyaltsab says, however, they are individual reasons. The one is the natural purity, the other is what induces adventitious purity. Furthermore, as it says there, the latter is the meaning of realizing adventitious stains, these adventitious stains that can be removed because afflictions lack inherent existence. Okay, now on to the second. The second quality that we saw in that delineation of the 8 is the knowledge, the realizing the varieties. So it says here, the exalted wisdom knowing varieties through seeing modes realizes that all sentient beings possess the nature of the emptiness of inherent existence of complete Buddhahood, meaning again, their Buddha nature. So this is delineating in particular a conventional wisdom that the bodhisattva coming out of that meditative equipoise has. Through having realized modes, emptiness in meditative equipoise, the bodhisattva then knows that all beings have Buddha nature. They have a mind that is empty of inherent existence, and they have a mind that can therefore develop into Buddhahood because these stains can be removed. Kind of, again, that developmental Buddha nature, and then the naturally abiding Buddha nature. You have a completely different understanding of this coming out of a direct realization of emptiness. And we can all get it in this course, hopefully, as an intellectual exercise, but we won't really know it in that way until we've had that true path, that is a wisdom directly realizing emptiness. Then in the middle paragraph there, the middle of that says the third inner knowledge, was called again, the realizing inner knowledge. It says there should be understood as taught by the above two. This is kind of the idea that once you have the knowledge of modes and the knowledge of varieties, then you have this inner individual knowledge of those that you possess. So again, it's not really that profound. It's just meaning that this has been integrated into your awareness at a deeper level. The next 3 have the meaning of possessing an awareness that is free from the obscurations of attachment and of obstructions, and from inferior obscurations. Again, this is simply referred to as being pure. If we look, if we go back up a little bit in terms of this commentary, the last 3 were called Here, freedom from obscurations of attachment, freedom from obscurations of obstruction, and freedom from inferior obscurations. I went through explaining those a short while ago. But essentially, these are the three that are referred to in our verses simply is pure. And that the Sangha jewel is pure because it's anyone who is a Sangha jewel is free from some level of these obscurations. Then it says freedom from obscurations of inferior type are explained as the meaning of the latter, yet there is no contradiction. Because I guess once you kind of begin that process of being in that category of working on the knowledge obstructions, once more, you're definitely irreversible. So you will not have any inferior obscuration, any longing for the hinayana freedom, the personal nirvana, solitary peace. So I'm going to skip that last paragraph that was on page 55. We're now going on to page 56 of your commentary. This is verse 14. Because the perception of realizing modes, varieties, and inner knowledge is pure, so that's including all the first six qualities, right? Modes, varieties, inner knowledge, that's the first three, that's knowledge. And then the pure is referring to the freedom from the various levels of obscuration. The assembly of the irreversible intelligent ones is endowed with unsurpassed excellent qualities. So again, by virtue of the purity of the exalted wisdom of inner knowledge, Gyaltsab says, the knower of modes and the knower of varieties, it teaches that it possesses qualities of freedom. And therefore, the irreversible assembly of intelligent Aryas is endowed with the highest qualities. So let's carry on with just a little bit more of this commentary. There's just that one right there towards the top of the page. That's the only part here. And then we go on to verse 15, which we will do a little bit of a commentary on that as well. So the commentary on this, in brief, this realization of modes and varieties, which again is encompassed in inner knowledge, arises from two causes. We saw that earlier, right? Again, natural purity, clear light nature of the mind, and the fact that the afflictions are also pure in terms of not having any inherent existence and therefore can be removed. And that's the adventitious stains that can be purified. So the other qualities are also taught by reason of these two, because of those two existing. And they're going to mirror what we see in Buddha nature, as I said. Okay, so now we have a little bit more description on this. Verse 15. This is again in regard to the first knowing modes. Because they realize migrators to be pacified by nature, in other words, empty of inherent existence, they realize things as they are, due to natural, thorough purity and afflictions being exhausted from the beginning. This is once more delineating those same two causes that I've been highlighting as we go through this. Because they directly realize migrators, this is the top of page 57, persons and aggregates, to be in the nature of peace or empty of inherent existence, they see modes. Knowing modes arises from two causes: the realization of the absolute purity of sentient beings, the clear light nature of their mind, and the realization that afflictions are eradicated from the beginning. In other words, there's never again any inherent existence to the afflictions at all. They are arising on the basis of causes and conditions as dependent arisings in that way. They lack any independent existence and therefore can be removed. That they are empty of inherent existence and have naturally ceased. Of course, this is the knowledge that you would have once you become a Sangha jewel, once you have a true path and a true cessation. So now I'm not going to go through these sort of commentaries on a lot of this as we go through this. This one I wanted to touch on just briefly because I think it does highlight some important points. First of all, the entity of the knower of modes. This is still that first quality of a Sangha jewel. Every Sangha jewel has realized emptiness directly, therefore has a knower of modes, knows the emptiness of all phenomena in some way. Not that they know all phenomena, but they know the emptiness, which is the same quality that all phenomena possess. What should be understood from the direct realization of modes within migrators is that modes refers to the final and ultimate truth, the reality limit of there being no inherently existing self of phenomena, that is, the aggregates, or self of persons, that is, transmigratory beings. Remember, we talked about two categories of selflessness. phenomena and persons. Persons are persons, phenomena are anything other than persons, the aggregates, form, and so forth. Gyaltsab continues, through directly realizing that, they realize modes. Because it teaches that the reality limit should be known as the selflessness of persons and of phenomena, it clearly teaches that the complete realization of the selflessness of persons depends upon a realization of the lack of true existence of persons. This is a kind of unique point of the Madhyamika view, particularly the Prasangika Madhyamika, the consequence middle way school. And that's the fact that many of these other tenet systems, and many of you have studied tenets, they all adhere to persons having a particular way of lacking of existing, what's called being self-sufficient, substantially existent, but phenomena having a different way. If they're a Mahayana school, such as mind only and the Svatantrika Madhyamika. Again, I'm not going to go into all the detail of that. You'll study tenets if you haven't. But the idea here is that Prasangika alone of these schools, these tenet systems, says that you have to realize the lack of inherent existence of the person and phenomena. It's the same thing that is being negated, whether you talk about persons or phenomena. The other schools will say, in the Mahayana traditions, they will say, well, you realize the emptiness of persons to achieve your nirvana, but you realize the emptiness of phenomena to achieve Buddha. And just pointing out that unique perspective. So you have to realize the emptiness of the person, yourself, as well as all other people, beings, but you also realize the same emptiness, lack of true existence or inherent existence of phenomena. So then the last line in this, it says, it is therefore extremely clear that this commentary is in line with the way Acharya Chandrakirti expounded the view of the protector Nagarjuna. In other words, this is not a view of mind only, even though, again, a Sangha who wrote the commentary on Uttara Tantra that Gyaltsab is commenting on was propounded to be a mind-only follower, but there's a lot of evidence, again, as we saw earlier in the text, that he knew the middle way view perfectly. He just delineated the mind only as a track for those who have a disposition that requires that level of selflessness, understanding, and so on. So let me read this last paragraph of this commentary, and then again, I won't be reading a lot of the commentaries. I'll just go through the very brief bits on the remaining verses for the Sangha Jewel. So, the causes once more of this. In the nature of peace without beginning, persons and phenomena are directly realized by Mahayana Aryas as empty of inherent existence, in the manner of existing like that since the beginning, and without fear of previously existing inherently, but at present being empty. It's not like things existed inherently, and then through our wisdom realizing emptiness, they don't anymore. They never existed inherently. So in brief, once more, it arises from two causes: the realization of the mind being in the nature of clear light, and the realization of the afflictions of the mind as primordially exhausted and ceased, that is, empty of inherent existence. The mind not being ultimately defiled by the afflictions is the meaning of being in the nature of clear light, right? All of these things, that all of our ignorance and afflictions, all this that exists in our mind are not inherent to the mind. They're not being ultimately defiled by it because no such thing exists. Furthermore, it also means that nothing exists in the mind that accords with the mode of apprehension of the darkness of ignorance, apprehending inherently existent persons and phenomena. In other words, it means we're grasping at a non-existent. When we have our ignorance present in the mind, we are grasping at something that is fictitious, that is deluded, that is not in line with reality at all. Further, or then it says, if that were the case, move it up a little bit. If that were the case, the mind would be inherently established and the defilements could not be purified. In other words, if the opposite was true, if actually we were according things in reality when the ignorance was present, if what we were grasping at through the mind of ignorance, inherent existence, did exist, then the mind would be inherently established, the defilements couldn't be purified. All of this would be consequences if the mind actually did inherently exist, if things did inherently exist as our ignorance grasps at them too. Continuing, what does it mean for afflictions to be ultimately non-existent and adventitious? This is explained here as it teaches explicitly that the mode of objects of knowledge means their selflessness of persons and phenomena. To then assert that the lack of true existence of compounded phenomena is a nihilistic emptiness, an emptiness of matter or partial emptiness, is to assert an emptiness supreme in all aspects that is a truly established thing. In other words, you're still grasping at inherent existence if you think emptiness is referring to any of these things. It's not a nihilistic emptiness. It's not denying everything, that nothing exists. It's not an emptiness of matter or function or what have you, these sort of denying other qualities. A partial emptiness, I'm not even sure what a partial emptiness would be, emptiness in some respect, but not in others. Such an assertion, he says, is a grave wrong view and strays from the intention of the Sublime Continuum and its commentary. Cast these absurd consequences afar like spittle. The meaning of emptiness supreme in all aspects is not this, and will be explained. So again, this text doesn't deal with kind of the immediate ways of realizing emptiness, but emptiness is the underpinning for the presentation of Buddha nature, and of course for the presentation of the three jewels, all the causes that lead us to be able to accomplish that. So again, I'm going to skip forward from here, but I just wanted to reiterate with that. We're going to go forward to page 59, where we get into the next verse. This is all pertaining, everything we looked at just now that I just finished, was all pertaining to the very first quality, knowing modes. Verse 16 refers to knowing varieties. Maitreya's text says, they are endowed with knowledge of varieties because the mind that realizes the final objects of knowledge sees that the nature of omniscience is present in all sentient beings. Doesn't mean that all beings already have an omniscient mind. What's called here the nature of omniscience, Buddha nature, omniscient nature. You have omniscient nature. You have a natural basis upon which omniscience can be cultivated. So let's look at the commentary, just this little bit of commentary on the root verse that the Sangha gives. Gyaltsep gives. The emptiness of inherent existence of the omniscient nature of the mind directly realizing modes, the final object of knowledge, is directly perceived to exist within all sentient beings. Again, this is the conventional awareness that the Bodhisattva has upon having had the direct realization of emptiness. They see that all beings, just like themselves, possess a mind that is in the nature of clear light, no stains of inherent existence at all, and therefore the afflictions are adventitious and can be removed. So therefore, as he said, varieties are realized. And of course, he's also, that Bodhisattva, they are also realizing, that all phenomena exist through mere imputation, dependent arisings, what have you. Then it says, because complete and perfect Buddhas realize modes, they realize varieties. And because they realize varieties, they realize modes. Of course, in a Buddha, as I said earlier, realizes all conventional truths, all ultimate truths. However, it is not the same for Arya Bodhisattvas because they have not yet attained buddhahood, where they have an omniscient mind knowing the two truths simultaneously. It is explained that they must realize modes in dependence on their meditative equipoise. So again, for a bodhisattva, what is going on, an Arya Bodhisattva, they go into their meditative equipoise, they're directly realizing emptiness. Remember, that's divided into two parts. I mentioned this last week. The first uninterrupted path, that is the true path, that is the antidote to a level of obscuration. And then the true cessation occurs during the liberated path. The mind is still realizing emptiness, but then there's an awareness that a portion of the obscurations has been eliminated. Then after that meditative equipoise is over and the bodhisattva comes out into subsequent attainment, there is a different knowledge of things. It's really interesting when we studied it in the master's program. It's kind of like, again, everything will appear as if it's real. And that's so for all the way up to the 10th ground bodhisattva. When they're not in meditative equipoise, everything has a false appearance. It still seems to be real from its own side. But they don't believe it for a second. And in fact, they know that that is not the final nature of phenomena, that actually how they are appearing and how they exist are two different things, and that how they are appearing is totally fictitious, totally false. So again, that awareness induces in them an understanding of the conventional minds of beings who have the ability to develop into Buddhahood, the emptiness that supports all of that they've directly realized. So what's being emphasized in this presentation is the awareness of an Arya Bodhisattva that even strengthens their desire to become a Buddha for the sake of other beings, because they know that it's completely possible for all beings to attain that state of perfect enlightenment. We kind of know it conceptually, but we don't know it experientially at all until we've had that direct realization. All right. I'm going to skip the rest of this page, go to the next verse that's still on the Sangha jewel. This is referring to inner knowledge, the first part of verse 17, lines A and B. Whatever is realized in this way is seen by one's own exalted wisdom. So again, the knower of modes and the knower of varieties are become your sort of individual awareness. So the modes and varieties directly realized by Aryas are realizations of their individual exalted wisdoms, right? It's just kind of a weird way of talking about it because you've already said they've had the two knowledges, but they've kind of become a personal individual experience of those knowledges, knowledge of both ultimate truth and conventional truth. Although again, the Arya Bodhisattva doesn't hold them both simultaneously in the way that a Buddha does. The last two lines of verse 17. This is the freedom from the obscurations of attachment and obstruction. It is pure because in the undefiled sphere, there is neither attachment nor obstruction. So again, these three are all within the context of pure. They're referring to the freedom or liberation aspect of the Sangha jewel, the fourth through the sixth qualities. The commentary here says, since there is no attachment grasping at true existence of the naturally pure sphere, and because there are no obstructions to all objects of knowledge, in other words, obstructions to omniscience, to buddhahood, it is pure of the obscurations of attachment and obstructions. Okay, so those are the first two that are being referred to in terms of purity. The third is kind of, again, just, I don't know if we have another verse for that. I think we do in terms of the inferior obscurations is coming up next. That's verse 18. So this was referring to the fourth and the fifth qualities, all right? That's all the commentary I'm going to read on that. I think, let's see. Gotta look at my notes here. I'm skipping that. Let's go forward to the next page, page 61, and we'll go through verse 18, which again is pertaining to the last of these pure, free from the inferior obscurations. Verse 18 says, because the realization of the exalted wisdom is pure, it is close to the Buddha's unsurpassable exalted wisdom. Therefore, the noble ones who are irreversible are a refuge for all beings. So again, especially for us on the Mahayana path, we want to have a Sangha jewel that is irreversible in that way, not going to revert to an inferior motivation of obtaining one's own liberation. So this paragraph, again, has a lot of information, and I'll try to explain as best as I can. The knower of modes, varieties, and inner exalted wisdom, again, those are the first three, those three knowledges, are pure. That's referring to the aspect of freedom that is there with the Sangha jewel, the fourth, fifth, and sixth quality. But here we're specifically looking at the sixth. Therefore, the Buddha's wisdom is unsurpassable. Since Arya Bodhisattva's exalted wisdoms are close to that, that is possessed by a Buddha, because of course a Buddha jewel would have the Sangha jewel complete. They would have all knowledge of modes and varieties and complete purity from all obscurations. So it says the exalted wisdoms of those Arya Bodhisattvas are close to that. Irreversible Arya Bodhisattvas are therefore a refuge for all beings and are free from inferior obscurations. Alternatively, taking that which is explicitly mentioned here to refer to eighth ground Bodhisattvas and onward, which again is when you have that quality of irreversibility without a doubt. Some people are a little slower than others and they don't get that until they get to the eighth ground. It says here, they are then free from inferior obscurations because they have attained qualities superior to bodhisattvas on the seventh ground and below. What happens as you go through these 10 grounds? Let me take it off here for just a moment. As you go through these 10 grounds, you achieve like a development of your qualities that is exponentially greater than the previous ground. The first ground, you were able to emanate 100 bodies, and you have all these various things in the number of 100, and then you go to 1,000, and then you go to 10,000, and then you go to 100,000, and so on. You achieve greater and greater qualities as you go through all of this. When you get to the 8th, 9th, and 10th grounds, recall again that at that point you're on what are called the pure grounds, meaning you've removed the afflictive obscuration. In terms of what you've done, it's comparable to an arhat, but you've done so much more because you've also been accumulating so much merit through the force of your bodhicitta and the deeds of a bodhisattva, the six perfections and so on. You've been doing all of this to accumulate these great stores of merit so you can accomplish Buddhahood, but you have yet to remove the knowledge obstructions on these three pure grounds. And that's where the last sort of effort to the bodhisattva goes into removing those very subtle stains, again, that give rise to that dualistic appearance, that false appearance. So it's at that point when every bodhisattva is necessarily irreversible. And as I said, it can happen even as early as the first round. I think for some it might even happen prior to that. I have to go back and look at my studies on the ornament for clear realization. But I think there are like 3 different places where everyone of different predispositions will have attained that irreversible quality. So then it goes on to say, the explanation, according to the translation of a Sangha's commentary, is that bodhisattvas abiding on the pure grounds possess pure exalted wisdoms, realizing modes and varieties. Again, because they no longer have the afflictive obscurations in their mind. Their wisdoms are therefore close to those to the Buddha's unsurpassable exalted wisdom. And for this reason, irreversible Arya bodhisattvas on the pure grounds are refuges for all beings. Again, we won't know those levels of realizations of others, but we will know them ourselves when we actually experience them, when we attain those realizations. All right, take a little breath here. That's the Sangha jewel. So again, what we've looked at so far then are the 3 jewels, the first 3 topics. We're going to have a little summarization of this in the last few verses on the 3 jewels and what refuge means, conventional, ultimate, what have you, final, provisional. And then we're also going to have a little bit on the meaning of jewel, because we often call them the 3 jewels. The kind of precise definition for that is rare and sublime. This is why Rinpoche would always call them the 3 rare sublime ones. So we've looked at those 3 jewels in terms of those charts. Again, we've got 8 qualities delineated for each of them. They're divided into first 2 sets of 3 that can be summarized within the last 2. But they all have kind of, again, one aspect that has to do with kind of the development of all these various qualities, and another that has to do with sort of the freedom that is obtained. And then the Buddha jewel, it's culminated with the 2 aspects of a Buddha's experience and the ways that they are able to culminate their own welfare and the welfare of others. But essentially, the Dharma jewel is doing those 2 things. We're achieving a wisdom and knowledge, and then we are removing some impurities in the mind. The Sangha is talked about in terms of the knowledge that they possess, and then the freedom that they have by virtue of that. So it's kind of a very brief way of looking at it, but hopefully you can digest this a little bit more in the discussion when we do that. I'm going to try, and we'll see if we get through it, to go through what I'm doing for this last part. I'm just going to introduce this topic using the text. Go to page 63, the meaning of refuge, which is at the bottom there. And then I'm going to give, you've all got a chart again that Venerable Handrick kindly put up on the resource page for you to access, where I give a very brief summarization of the commentary on each of these. I know I won't be able to finish it tonight, but I actually want to at least start it. First of all, in terms of the divisions of the objects of refuge, and introducing this, Gyaltsab Je says, the purpose of presenting the topic of refuge here is to clarify the intention behind the presentation of the 3 jewels in the Buddha's words, and not only within the context of the 3 jewels mentioned thus far. Remember, I mentioned this previously. There are 2 types of refuge. Resultant refuge, which again is how we're looking at the 3 jewels in this text, our own resultant state of being the Buddha jewel, Dharma jewel, Sangha jewel, and causal refuge, which are in the presentation in our text, the enlightened beings and so on that are supporting us on our path, that are kind of cooperative conditions for our enlightenment. Again, for Mahayana lineage beings, he says, all 3 jewels are taken as their object of attainment. That's because we primarily take the Buddha jewel as the object of attainment. But once you obtain the Buddha jewel, it's the culmination of the Dharma jewel and the Sangha jewel. You have all 8 qualities in their full capacity with regard to the Dharma and Sangha jewels. So we could say that the object of attainment for all of us as Mahayanas is to become the 3 jewels, which when you become the Buddha jewel, by default, you have both the Dharma jewel and the Sangha jewel present. So it says, therefore, all 3 are presented as resultant refuge. Now, for those of the solitary realizer lineage, they say the solitary realizers are a bit superior to the hearers in that they are engaged in more accumulation of merit to achieve their goal of becoming an arhat. And they particularly take an interest in the teachings on the 12 links of dependent arising and understanding it very thoroughly. So therefore, for those of that lineage, the Dharma jewel is the resultant refuge because they really put great store and faith into those teachings in particular and realizing them deeply in their own minds. Those of the hearer lineage, which are by far the larger part of those on the fundamental vehicle, for them, it's the Sangha jewel because they very much are about becoming part of a collection of the Arya Sangha and what have you, and supporting it in that manner. They are gatherers and then part of the assembly and what have you. This is what hearers do, and they gather together. Whereas solitary realizers tend to want to achieve their form of enlightenment. Again, it's not full enlightenment, but we would say again is their arhatship or state of foe destroyer. They want to do that on their own in their last life. Okay, of course, hearers can also take the Dharma jewel as their object of attainment, but this explanation is within the context of creating a clear division within the refuges into three. We're going to see this reappear in one of the verses in a moment. From the perspective of causal refuge, because that was the resultant, all three jewels are presented as a refuge for all three lineage beings, bodhisattvas, solitary realizers, hearers. Why? Since the three jewels already established in others' continua, the teacher of the path to enlightenment that is taught by them, the Dharma, and the assembly of Aryas who have correctly accomplished that path, they are all viewed as the assistants in their attaining of the respective jewels. We need to depend upon all three jewels in a causal manner, but then depending upon what vehicle we are in, we depend upon a particular jewel as our resultant refuge. Now again, eventually all those beings are going to have to achieve Buddhahood. So the Buddha jewel is the final object of attainment for all beings, but nonetheless, they have their one that they are directly kind of in line with and following. Okay, the last I'm going to cover on terms of commentary, and then we'll go to my little chart, is this paragraph on the way to take refuge. Most of you have studied this before, but I think it's nice to reiterate it. The way to take refuge is through verbally accepting and mentally committing to the three jewels as being a protector and support for liberation from the great fear of suffering and obscurations. Again, this is the two components of kind of how we take refuge. Some level of fear of suffering, our own, others, what have you, and then seeing the three jewels as being capable of protecting us, having that confidence that they will do that. The next line, holding either of the jewels or any of the jewels as the protector and object of attainment within one's own continuum is to go for resultant refuge. Holding the jewels already established in the continuum of others as the protector which liberates from fears is to go for causal refuge. It has already been explained that it is not necessarily the case that if going for causal refuge, one will go for resultant refuge in all three jewels. However, by going for resultant refuge, one definitely goes for causal refuge in all three jewels. It's essentially saying that, you may have a distinct jewel that you find as your resultant jewel. I want to become the Sangha jewel, or I want to become the Buddha jewel. But then when it comes to causal refuge, you have to rely on all. Okay, so this is again, there is much more about refuge if you studied the Lam Rim in terms of the precepts of refuge, commitments of refuge. Our text doesn't go into all of that. Instead, what our text does, and let me go ahead and pull up the chart that I put together for this, that I hope you find useful because I just found that the commentary got a little bogged down, and so I just didn't really want to, this is it. It's called the chart on the meaning of refuge and then the meaning of jewel, which is the other part of this beginning of our text. Let's look at the verses that pertain to the meaning of refuge. I'm just going to tonight just go through in a very brief way. We'll begin with this next week and I'll go to it in more detail. For the meaning of refuge, we first have what is called here in our text a presentation of conventional refuge. Unfortunately, I kind of use this term conventional and ultimate, these two terms, in a slightly different way here too. The way that they're actually being used is more in line with how His Holiness and Venerable Children talk about them in following in the footsteps of the Buddha. Let me pull that up real quick on the, if I can get it up here, on the slides. So I've got a little commentary from that book that I decided to give you as a way of getting oriented around this particular part of this explanation on refuge. The three objects of refuge are spoken of as final, and then they have in parentheses ultimate, and provisional or conventional. And as I say in my little note there, note that the meaning of conventional and ultimate here is not identical when those terms are used elsewhere, such as in that chart of the 7 vajra points. We talked about conventional and ultimate last week on that. Remember what I said there in that context was like, that's it. The ultimate is something that has kind of a deeper substance to it that makes it more reliable. The conventional can still be relied upon, but it's not, it's going to have some changeable qualities to it. Such as for the Buddha jewel, the ultimate is the Dharmakaya, but the kind of conventional are the form bodies, the Rupakaya. But we still depend upon the Rupakaya without a doubt. And it is fully developed. It just is, something different. So this is not, I'm going to use final and provisional as much as I can when we talk about this. Let's look at how they describe this so that we have an understanding that will allow us to make sense out of those verses. A final object of refuge, they say, is a refuge that has completely traversed the path, meaning you're on the path of no more learning. Absolutely. You will never have to engage in any additional development or purification. And a provisional object of refuge is a refuge that has not completely traversed the path. So that, would be all the beings that are Aryas, but that have not yet attained full enlightenment, all of the realizations in their minds, the cessations, and so on. The final refuge is the final destination we aim to attain by following the path, whereas the provisional refuge helps us to arrive there. And again, in this tradition, there is only one final vehicle, one final object that we are attaining, and that's complete Buddhahood. In this light, the final refuge is a Buddha having the 4 Buddha bodies that I spoke of earlier. A Buddha with these 4 bodies is our final refuge, the final destination that we want to actualize on the path. There is nothing higher than this. So that's all I'm sharing from that. There's more in their text on final and provisional refuges. But that's what we're going to be talking about when we resume next week. We get back into this chart. Let me just put it up there and go through it in a very cursory way. We're going to initially have a presentation of provisional refuge, the things that we can rely upon on our path as we're developing that have not been fully developed yet themselves, perhaps. Then we have the presentation of final refuge. First of all, we're going to prove that any refuge that's not a Buddha is not a final refuge. We're going to go through the actual proof of that, showing how there are still flaws with anything that is not fully developed. Then in the next verse 21, we're going to go to the second part of this, proving that only a perfect and complete Buddha is the ultimate refuge, is the final refuge, because of the qualities that the Buddha possesses. Then finally, the meaning of jewel. And this is a separate little section right at the end of this before we get into the topic of Buddha nature. And this just gives us an appreciation for all the dimensions of why they're called jewel. There are 6 different reasons why they're called jewel. Okay, so with the remaining time that we have, I do want to do at least about 20 minutes of discussion. Might just take a second to get up and move around a little bit before you get into your groups. It looks like we have enough folks online to maybe do a couple of groups, perhaps, if people are staying for the discussion. Those in the Gompa here, I think we got about enough for one group. I think would be good if people are able to do that. What you're going to be discussing is, as we talked about previously, if you want to go back to last week's class and discuss the Buddha jewel, that's perfectly fine. Now, again, this discussion is yours alone. I'm not, getting a report from anybody on this. This is just you getting together with colleagues in this class and discussing these topics in your own words as best as you can, though certainly use the materials to refer to if you need to. It's just to help you to digest these topics a little bit more by talking about them to other people and seeing if you got the right understanding. And those of you in the group, listen to what others are saying. Don't become really kind of forceful in doing this, but do challenge. If somebody says something that's maybe not quite the right idea, say, well, the way I heard it was maybe this, and do you see that as the same, or are we just talking about different things? I mean, just find a way to discuss it among your group members. That's very, light and cooperative. And then we'll come back in about 20 minutes or so and just see if there are any questions that came up in the process of that. That's really the aim of this, is to see where you might still have questions. Maybe based on the way other people were explaining things, you're not quite sure that you have the right understanding. And then you come back in and ask that. So we'll have a few minutes at the end to do that, as well as to answer any other questions from tonight. All right. So please, I'll put on the screen for the moment again what the question was from last week that pertained. It was on the one handout that I had. Let me see again if I can find that. I think it's, oops, I hit stop. How did I do that? One of the problems, like I said, I could get to that thing. I've got to pull up these. This worries me a little bit. There it is, I think. Okay, there. Yeah. This one, again, was covered in session 3. What is the definition of the Buddha jewel? Identify and explain those 8 excellent qualities, highlighting any relationships among them. And then again, I partially covered this. I completed this tonight. What's the definition of the Dharma jewel? Identify and explain the 8 excellent qualities of that. And then again, that's in verse 110, highlighting any relationships. I'm giving you some additional questions for this week, the Sangha jewel. And then I went on to give questions pertaining to meaning of refuge and meaning of jewel. Obviously, we didn't get to those two, but this will at least give you, the questions that we'll be looking at as we move forward. So that, again, these are the things that I would hope that you can discuss, at least the Buddha jewel and possibly the Dharma jewel if you have time. All right. So please break out into groups and we'll reconvene in about 20 minutes. Thank you. Okay. Let's go ahead and resume as a group and see what questions people might have. So, anyone in the Zoom room or here in the Gompa have any questions from your discussion? Yes, Lou, please. Okay. Right. Mhm. Right. Right. Okay. Yeah. So Lou's question has to do with when we say that mind is beginningless, but yet we say that once you've removed the afflictions, it's irreversible. So that's a lasting state, that you would be in a stable state. So you would never revert to having afflictions. So does that mean that all minds have had afflictions from beginningless time as well? That the afflictions have been there as long as mind has been there? Of course, until the purification is done and one attains buddhahood or whatever state of realization you're in. Yes. I mean, this is where it's kind of strange. I mean, because people do, that we point to when we talk about Buddha nature and having this sort of fundamental purity of the mind, it doesn't mean, again, that the mind has ever had that purity manifest in terms of all of the defilements removed. Adventitious purity, once it does, once you have accomplished it, then it's irreversible. You never revert to having delusions in the mind again. It's kind of interesting in some of the initial teachings of the Buddha and some of the like Vibhashika school and what have you, they have this idea of people being able to somehow revert from attaining the state of arhatship. And so sometimes when you talk about that fourth immeasurable, sometimes it's the third immeasurable joy, where we say, may all sentient beings never be parted from the joy of higher rebirth and liberation. I mean, if you say, well, may all sentient beings never be parted from liberation, is it possible to be parted from liberation? And is it possible to revert back into a state where you're contaminated by the afflictions? Apparently, there were some teachings initially that made it think like that was the case. And so that some of these prayers were being done from that vantage point of may all sentient beings attain a state of liberation that's lasting, as opposed to something that could revert to having contamination again. But that's according to the Mahayana middle way school in particular. That's impossible. Once you have removed them and they're gone, but they absolutely have been there as long as you've had a mind, which means without any beginning. So, and some people might ask, well, what's the difference between that and like what we say in, I grew up Catholic, we have this idea of original sin. Well, there's some similarities in that you sort of have an innate or inborn quality, not yeah, inborn, I think would be the best way, or innate works as well. You come forward with something, but that something is not there without the ability to remove it. It absolutely can be removed, as we saw in tonight's teaching. So yes, it has been there since beginningless time, all the afflictions, all the obscurations that we're talking about, but they can all be removed, and it's irreversible once we have done that. Okay. Any other questions? Yes, Tony. When we use the term migrator or migratory beings, yeah, is that an ordinary being? I mean, we can say that beings still migrate even until they attain liberation from the causes of migrating. Because if you have somebody, a Arya Bodhisattva, who has realized emptiness but hasn't yet removed all of the afflictive obscurations, they still have the seeds that give rise to a future existence. Now they take rebirth with the force of their compassion rather than the force of their, karma and delusion. But nonetheless, when we use the term migrator, someone who migrates from life to life, in general, referring to beings who are still together with delusion, and being reborn through delusion. But nonetheless, this term is not as technical a term as some of the other ones. So when it's used in various contexts, it seems to be almost coextensive with sentient being, which is, then it becomes even bigger in terms of that would include anything that's not a Buddha, any being that's not a Buddha. Do you have another question about that? What is a migrator? Right, right. Hmm. So again, the term ordinary being versus Arya, because again, your first question was migratory being and ordinary being, and that would be again slightly different. I mean, and I'm not sure that they always are, because again, when we talk about Aryas, yes, they have realized emptiness directly. They have begun the process of removing the obscuration. They may not necessarily have completed it, though we can refer to a Buddha as an Arya Buddha, just as a person who is a Buddha. But Arya means anyone who has attained direct realization and above. They are a superior being. So, you know, see, and that's a phrase that I don't hear either. So what Tony was saying is when we talk about an Arya being, we mean somebody who's had that direct realization of emptiness, that meditative equipoise we spoke of earlier. But they also are, you use the phrase, absorbed in emptiness when they are engaged in activities, right? We don't use the term absorb because an absorption into meditation on emptiness is done on the cushion with, or I mean, in the state where you are single pointedly on emptiness, and emptiness and the mind become like one. So you can't have conventional phenomena appearing then. You can't have conventional activities being engaged in that. So when we say, I mean, maybe the better way to say would be influenced by the wisdom of emptiness, absolutely. you're together with that realization. And it has, I mentioned this earlier tonight, it has impacted the way that you think about everything that exists. When things appear to be real from their own side, you don't believe it for a second. So you're definitely under the influence, driving under the influence of the wisdom realizing emptiness. So, yeah, because it tends to mean meditation. Yeah. Well, so the question is the Arya being then is having that working knowledge of emptiness while they're doing their things and not disturbed from it. In terms of they you can't lose that because that awareness is it's changed you. Again, I can't speak from personal experience. I'm speaking from what the texts say. You know, when you come out of that, you're a changed being because you no longer have any conviction at all, one atom of inherent existence. So you will relate to everything in a very different way. So not disturbed from it. I mean, I just mean you would always have that as a constant. That would always be the underpinning of your awareness. I mean, if we go back to the analogy I used last week of the dream state, if you were an absolute lucid dreamer who could never be moved from lucid dreaming, you would you would have that awareness all the time then. Everything that was appearing to you in the dream state, you knew as a dream of. And you would have no reaction to it emotionally or anything because you know it doesn't exist in the way that it appears. That's the kind of level of awareness that an Arya being has. Yeah. So this is an ordinary being realizing emptiness conceptually rather than direct. Well, then they become an Arya. I think the terms are getting kind of confusing because again, ordinary beings have necessarily not had a meditative equipoise, and that's the definition of an ordinary being. Aryas or superiors have had that. That's the delineation between them. Mhm. Right. Correct. Yeah. Sure. Well, again, they still so the ordinary being this is just prior to the path of seeing. They sit in meditative equipoise. It's the last moment before they have the direct realization of emptiness. They're in meditation, realizing emptiness, cultivating a true path. Then they have a true cessation in the very next moment after they've removed a portion of the obscurations. In this case, for the path of seeing, it's the acquired, the mentally acquired, the intellectually acquired afflictive obstructions. So then they come out of that meditation. And of course, they still have the other afflictive obstructions that are innate, and they still have the knowledge obstructions that are causing this false appearance. So they're still going to be under the influence of those being in the mind. But no, they're an Arya at that point. They're an Arya from the point of the true path. Yeah, yeah, really. It's an Arya being once they have their direct realization of emptiness, non-conceptual wisdom realizing emptiness, like water poured into water. Yeah. So that's an Arya. That's the definition of an Arya, is a being who has had that realization. They're no longer an ordinary being and they never will be an ordinary being. that too is irreversible. You have more questions than Tony. Maybe you need to think about it. We need to. So, Sean, you had your hand up. Is this something, maybe even at least get the question out so we make sure we remember it for next week if I don't have time to answer it? Yeah. It's not coming across the thing. Are you speaking now, Sean? Because we're not hearing anything. Yeah, he's unmuted right now. We're not hearing it. Would you mind writing it down and getting it to Venerable Dundrup or myself? I don't know if you have my email address. I can put it in the chat box so you have it. But, if you would, and then I will make sure that I start next week with answering your question. Okay. All right. Okay. Let's go ahead and close for tonight then, so we can be on our way. It's already a bit late. So let me go ahead and pull up on the screen the prayers for tonight to conclude with. I think I have to move things over a little bit. Okay. So many things open here. Okay, let's start with these two dedication prayers. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. And for His Holiness, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. We'll get some thunder to go, sound effects. And then for Rinpoche's swift return. Fearless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. Oops, sorry, too much. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and for mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. And very quickly, just dedicate for all those beings you're holding in your heart right now, whoever it is that is experiencing difficulty, problems, illness, what have you. Send this positive energy out to them. I think that it removes their suffering immediately and helps them to have all the causes that will lead them to true peace and happiness. And may all beings have these same results to what we've done here tonight. Okay, thank you all, everyone. If you get a chance, take a look at the chart that I did distribute newly, that one that I went through at the very end. That way you'll have a kind of some familiarity with it before next week when we go into that. And then we'll actually get into a bit more of the prelude to the Buddha nature and get into the actual topic of this course. So thank you all very much. Those online here in the Gompa, appreciate it. Very welcome. Thanks.